We got the story from SCNR.com. Governor Ron DeSantis deploys National Guard to Texas border. Quote, if we don't have a border, then we are not a sovereign country. DeSantis, who ended his 2024 campaign 2 weeks ago, has promised to deploy at least 1,000 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border in addition to the National Guard. This will mark the first deployment of the Florida State Guard. So that's distinct. I suppose that's where we're actually starting to see some escalation. Florida State Guard, my understanding, you can't federalize them.
No,
they're separate.
Can't. They're state.
So this is where things are starting to get particularly interesting. The concern with Texas National Guard being deployed is that Joe Biden could invoke the Insurrection Act or just make some declaration of we can't enforce the law without your help. One of the criteria for federalizing a National Guard is they can't enforce the law through other means, which could mean he doesn't need to go and say, oh, Texas are in state of rebellion. He could just be like, we love Texas, but we're going to need some help on that border. So now they're under my command. But the Texas State Guard and the Florida State Guard, not so much. So with Ron DeSantis deploying Florida State Guard down there, this will create a contingent that cannot be federalized. And this will solidify, I guess, state supremacy on the law or the states. Things are starting to get interesting. This could end here, or this could contribute to a larger, look, the federal government is supposed to be of the states. The states go to the federal government, and the federal government is formed basically like Captain Planet. All the states say, with our senators combined, we get, boom, federal government, sort of. Now it's basically like, yeah, we do not see you as in charge, and we are going to take it upon ourselves to unite, come together, and effectively form what the federal government was supposed to be on their own. So they say, according to the article, DeSantis visited Texas-Mexico border July of 2021. He sent both state law enforcement officers and members of the Florida National Guard to assist. He also sent 800 soldiers, 200 Florida Department of Law Enforcement officers, 101 state troopers, and 20 wildlife officers to assist Texas Border Patrol in May of 2023, as well as 5 planes, 17 drones, 2 command vehicles, and 10 boats. Quote, Biden has the authority to close the border today if he wanted to. He lacks the will to get the job done. He lacks the capacity to see the problem for what it is. So the American people are basically left scrambling. It's kind of sad, I got to be honest, that Ron, if he was just doing this while running, he didn't need to campaign at all.
That was the wild thing about listening to this speech today, which is it's just a totally different energy. I feel like we had campaign Ron and now we have Governor Ron DeSantis, and they're, he's much more confident. He speaks much more directly. All the criticisms that he didn't have personality, you couldn't say that here. And again, this is something that I think he feels very confident. He's been sending support to Texas since 2021. Different amounts at different times. He sent boats. He sent people. He sent wildlife agents. I mean, he has really reached into every capacity of the Florida government to say we're behind controlling the border. I think this is a good move for him in a lot of ways. I think, personally, I think supporting Texas and what they're doing is great. But I also think generally he is really putting himself back out there as the governor people remembered him as.
There's a meme. You know the meme where it's the guy poking the stick at the things? And he's like, come on, do something. Yeah. It's Karl Marx wearing a mask with a smiley face, and Karl Marx is crying behind it. And he's poking Texas and Joe Biden. He's like, come on, do a civil war. So here's an article from New Republic. MAGA's ugly new civil war fantasy should be taken seriously. It's funny because on the right, for the most part, everyone's saying like no civil war. And the left is saying, boy, they sure do want a civil war.
Like, you keep asking us, I guess we'll get it started. No, it's wild.
No, the left wants the civil war to start because then they can suspend the Constitution.
No, I think so too. I think what the Republican-led states are already doing is just saying, well, we don't consent to being governed this way, and so we will resist. I mean, that was what I thought was so powerful about the message that Abbott put out, saying our right to self-defense is the supreme law of the land, and nothing supersedes that. That's the way this works. And then every other state that was like, yes, we completely agree. Every other state that felt like state sovereignty is ultimately important stepped forward. And it's obviously not that surprising that it's along partisan lines, at least to me. I think Democratic states feel ultimately that the more concentrated and the closer their relationship to the federal government, the more power they have. But that's not the case. These states are banding together and saying, we don't want this and we're going to act accordingly in a nonviolent way.
While Tim was reading the list of everything that DeSantis is sending to Texas, I had this terrible image of the federal government stopping it in some similar fashion as to like the Sherman neckties that happened in the Civil War, where they would like burn the railroad tracks to stop the movement of all these like the food or ammo and stuff. I hope it doesn't come to that, but at some point I feel like they're going to try to stop this from happening.
I just think the federal government
checkpoints on federal highways.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I think the federal government's next move is to say, well, we're going to cut off money to the states that are doing this. That tends to be their move, to say we're going to, use the power of the purse to say you don't get this. But I think that, again, this has become such a clear issue, and it's winning over moderate voters too. Being against closing the border is actually not a popular position.
Here's what people need to consider. So Ron DeSantis is sending some troops to the border again. I guess, it's Florida State Guard this time, so that can't be federalized. Jeez. Imagine if 8 years ago, someone came to you and said, in 8 years, 10 states will have deployed law enforcement and National Guard to the Texas border in a standoff with the federal government as the feds try to break barriers to allow 10,000 criminal aliens every day to rush through the country. And the states began to reject federal authority. The Supreme Court gets involved. The issue that I think we have to understand is frogs in a pot boiling. It's not literal, but when we're at the point where Ron DeSantis, a governor, announces he's sending 1,000 troops to the border, which is in direct defiance of what the federal government is trying to do, every day when something small happens, we get used to it. At this point, we've already heard the news that 10 states have deployed National Guard to the Texas border. Now, hearing that Ron's adding more, it's kind of like, okay. But imagine how insane it would have been if we went from 2016 to that moment. Nobody would have believed this would ever happen. And I can tell you, because as much as people like to say, Tim Pool talks about civil war, I kept saying this will never happen. This is not what happens. And here it is. This is wild.
Well, this is what I think is so interesting about the showdown in Texas is it's kind of this manifestation of left versus right, when the left seems to love the federal government. They love everything federalized. They want it as big as possible. They want the almighty federal government to be as big and powerful and domineering as possible. The right is always very much about obviously limited government, but also the sovereignty of the states. And so it's really the showdown between like the states and the federal government. And it is like a left versus right thing. I mean, to this point, right. I mean,
it's just like COVID again with lockdowns.
Yeah.
There was people on the left who wanted everyone has got to shut down, ruin your life. But then we had the states, decide, thankfully, for some people.
It also reminds me of the wave of governors that banned TikTok on the, on state or on state property, state technology. And it was a wave of Republican governors. I think actually the governor of Nebraska led it off first, like 2 years early, then Kristi Noem, this was the end of 2022 into 2023. But then at the tail end, there were like, I think in total 3 or 4 Democratic governors that were like, yes, this technology is risky. We have to step in and say you can't access it because, part of their terms of service means they can access everything's on the computer or browsing data. So if you're a civil employee accessing someone's private information, it's actually a big risk. But it was right at the tail end that there were a couple Democratic governors that were like, okay, we're going to do this too. And I am wondering if, in a couple months that there's a chance that, a more moderate Democratic governor will say, okay, we're actually with Texas on this one. This is too risky to not be involved in.
Wow. But it's kind of like the breakdown with law enforcement too, because the left was screaming, defund the police, ban the police, but they love the FBI. They love the Federal Bureau. Yeah. Whereas conservatives are more like, we want law enforcement out of the federal government. Like let's Well,
they're Marxists. They love when they can weaponize the power against their enemies.
And I think
that's all they do.
Conservatives tend to be more supportive or at least more sympathetic to state or local police. And they are definitely more distrusting of anything on the federal level.
Where's the law enforcement, the prosecutors from, say, West Virginia or Texas? Why hasn't any prosecutor in Texas filed criminal charges against Joe Biden?
Good question.
Just outright. And let them argue he's immune. Is he immune or not? And let them argue, say, look, interview some CBP guys, Customs and Border Protection. Ask them why it is you are facilitating human trafficking. Why are you accepting handoffs from cartels? And when they say, just what I was ordered to do, you can go, okay, who's your boss? And then finally, you get to the guy at the top. You get to Mayorkas or whatever. And then you can say, Joe Biden was aware of this, and we want to criminally charge him. How about you start with a criminal investigation into Joe Biden and let them argue you can't do it, the president's immune. Oh, is he? Well, I guess you got to drop those charges against Donald Trump.
Is it your feeling, though, that the average liberal or leftist citizen is behind Joe Biden on this?
No.
Yeah, okay, because my feeling is that this is Biden kind of acting on his own. I don't feel like there's like a groundswell of support from the average citizen on the left.
Not that I've seen. I've seen a lot of people who basically put me in exile for things I've said during COVID come around to being like agreeing with me on most things now. So, but that's just me. Like, I don't know a lot of people. I'm not in New York anymore. Where that's
it's a hard thing to defend.
Those people exist. Oh yeah.
I mean, but New York has been really hard hit by all the immigration stuff, right? I mean, again, credit to Abbott, him busing migrants everywhere. The thing is, with the migrants that are in New York, and I can't remember the whole total, but at one point it was like 100,000 that had arrived in New York, but he had only bused like 30,000 there, which means that there were migrants coming in already anyways. He maybe exacerbated the problem by not allowing them to stay in Texas, but it called attention to an issue that New York was already coming under siege for. And that's something that New Yorkers day to day, I might generalize them as being more progressive than, someone in another part of the country. They are having to face the realities of immigration the way that border communities had to. And so it is an issue that I think is sort of undeniable. And ultimately, there are a lot of reasons. We've talked about, the effect of the fentanyl crisis. We've talked about the effect of human trafficking, human smuggling. There are a lot of ways to say this is a bad idea, no matter where your sympathies fall.
And I'll clarify for the individuals in the chat who lack the capability to hold more than one thought at a time. CBP officers that are facilitating human smuggling and working with cartel members should go to prison. When you interview them and you ask them why they're committing these crimes against humanity, and they invariably just say, I was told to do it, you now get criminal implications on their superiors. That does not mean they don't go to jail. But right now, politically, the question is, does Donald Trump have immunity for the actions he took as president? And the answer is yes, unless he's impeached and convicted. If the Democrats think otherwise, then the political opportunity is file criminal charges against Joe Biden, watch them come out screaming he's immune, and then watch Donald Trump's question get to his trial get dismissed.
Generally speaking, conservatives have not gotten wise yet to the idea of weaponizing the courts the way that the left has.
I got to be honest, I don't even look at it like weaponizing.
But the left is weaponizing, and we're not even, there's no counter reaction, is what I'm saying.
The anti-establishment faction is not even attempting to enforce the law in any capacity.
Correct.
So when you've got Joe Biden destroying property, charge the CBP agents with destruction of state property. That's a felony. Nope, we're not going to do that. Hold on. Someone gets an order to destroy state property, and the state's like, well, I guess they're allowed to do it. Is that a joke? They don't do anything.
Do you think you just described them as anti-establishment? Do you think that's part of it? They don't think about how to use the system to benefit because they are generally anti the system?
No. Anti-establishment doesn't mean you oppose governance. It's just there's a reason why the establishment gained the amount of power that it did, and why we're watching them. I mean, it's wild, man. It's a bunch of communists that are willing to say or do whatever they want for power, and then everyone else just keeps saying, "Leave me alone." Okay, well, you keep doing that, they're gonna keep gaining ground wherever they can.
Yeah, I feel like I don't agree with it, but I feel like a lot of it has to do with people being desensitized to the justice system being so broken and having no accountability on the left. So when people look at what happened with like the sex tape from the Senate or whatever.
Yeah,
like
the fact that they were like, we've closed the case, we can't find any evidence of wrongdoing.
Meanwhile,
this is the staffer who
people
filmed
at
himself.
J6 getting all this stuff put in prison, being chased around like
right.
So
with
Steve Baker.
We'll save this one for the larger subject, but the guy who filmed the adult film in Senate, no charges, none. Totally fine.
Crazy.
Well, they can't find evidence of wrongdoing. Like that was the line.
There's literally a video of wrongdoing.
There's literally a video, and they're like, we don't know.
It could be AI.
Anything could have happened.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
It's
But that,
scary.
I mean, that makes people cynical, and I think that miscarriage of justice or that just sort of blind denial, especially in this case, with comparing, contrasting it to J6ers is interesting because the more videos that came out proved more and more that. Mm-hmm. There were so many people who were just waved into the building. I mean, we had the shaman who was escorted around. This idea that there is actual video evidence that some prosecutor has decided I'm just actually going to turn a blind eye to. And in fact, it seems like juries are saying that doesn't count.
I think it's beyond that though, because we almost live in separate realities. There's people who look at those videos and still see the thing they want to see.
It's
terrifying.
But I think you're right. What you said about the desensitization of losing in the courts. It feels like we're always losing in the courts. And I mean, to me, even just based off my own personal experience, I feel like there is a certain wokeness. Like, I think that even the most...
Did you have a jury trial?
I didn't.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. No, I took a plea deal, as most people are doing in these cases, but I did have a Trump-appointed judge. Yeah. which did me no favors, trust me. Wow. And in fact, I would actually argue that in most cases, the people who drew the Trump judges they're getting the worst. Because first of all, I believe that a lot of the Trump appointed judges actually hate Trump. You know, just because they were appointed by Trump doesn't mean they were Trump supporters or Trump fans. It just means they have a history of conservatism. And at some point, they probably worked in the Bush administration or, you know, something like that. But in addition to that, I think that they feel like they have something to prove. You know, like, oh, just because I'm Trump appointed doesn't mean that I'm going to go easy on these Trump supporters. I'm going to go extra hard on them. Watch what I do. And I think that's happening with a lot of conservative judges around the country. I think it's another reason why we've lost faith in the courts, even if it's an immigration situation, whatever it is. We just feel like we can't win.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.